infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
What if monsters and entities exist? What if all the encounters reported on podcasts like Into the Fray are true? What happens when they creep into our world from other dimensions? Who would stop them? Who could? Project Threshold. This fall 2023, Project Threshold, created by Craig Crawford, is releasing on Amazon in novellas, telling the stories of courageous teams battling against deadly horrors invading our world. And sometimes they don't win. They beat back the monsters in secrecy so the rest of us can live without worrying what might be lurking under our beds. Go to projectthreshold.com and discover more. Join the team to learn about those who fight for us. Get monthly updates, background, free stories, and merch in a newsletter. Check out projectthreshold.com and protect humanity from darkness. So in this edition of Into the Fray, I welcome on listener Philip. He is out in Georgia, and we are here to talk about, well, my favorite subject, and that is Bigfoot. I think that, Philip, you wrote me after you heard the Polk County, North Carolina episode, if I'm not mistaken, over on YouTube. And you have experiences in several different states, correct?
That's true. Florida, right here around where I grew up. And then I used to live in North Georgia, but, I frequent the Georgia mountains as much as I can. I've got what I kind of hesitantly call a research area in that same spot near where, think about how funny this is. So his name is Philip, and he's in Polk County, and my name is Philip Polk Palmer. And
that is weird.
And the area where I have my experiences up there is literally like, it's right outside. It's on the Green River, probably 5 miles as the crow flies from where he is.
Wow. Okay, so you were listening to that episode going, okay, yep, this is legit. I know exactly what he's
I got
talking
on the
about.
map immediately to find that lake. I'm like, oh my God, the Green River feeds right into it. Just northeast of where it is, I go to as frequently as I can. I guess I've had a few experiences right across the river here in South Carolina, too.
So just to refresh everyone's memories about the Green River, is that a large river in relation to, say, like the Ohio River? Is it a large body of water, of moving water?
I don't think it compares on that. It is so the thing about like the Saluda area, it's the very lower section of the North Carolina and even upper Piedmont, South Carolina, part of the Appalachians. So the mountains aren't super high, but they're really steep. Like they go up in a big incline. So there's incredible rapids along that Green River. Now, I've never actually traversed the Green River. I just go to that spot where I go and I do hiking around it, and I put myself in those cold waters before.
Oh, I bet that'll wake you up, huh?
Yeah, but it's not like, as far as river size goes, no, not my experience. It does have some crazy rapids, and people come from all over to do that race that Philip from Polk County was referring to.
Well, we got to start with the time-honored traditional first question. How'd you get into Bigfoot?
Really early age. So I'm one of these guys that's old enough to remember back when you go to the movie theater, they didn't just play trailers for movies. They also ran cartoons and mini documentaries and stuff like that. And my mother and father had taken my twin brother and I to a movie. I think I even remember the movie. I think it was The Great Waldo Pepper with Robert Redford. They were running a short, and it was a short on Bigfoot, like a 20-minute documentary. And that's the first time I saw the Patterson Gimlin film. And I heard vocalizations. Now I can't remember what those were. They were howl type things, like maybe like the Ohio screams and things, but I wouldn't know exactly what they were. I just remember being in awe of this, like immediately, like it gripped me. I thought to myself, because they kept talking about the Pacific Northwest. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm not the Pacific Northwest, but there are mountains here. So I was like, even though I was with my parents, I was scared in the theater by some of this, but I was actually really thrilled at the same time. It just really lit me up.
So I don't know where you wanted to start as far as your experiences, or, did you start researching and then have an experience?
No, I could go through all my experiences or whatever we can get to chronologically, but that sometimes can be kind of boring. But I will say that I got into all sorts of interest in the paranormal in general, including the UFO phenomena, ghosts, anything that was outside of societal norms really started to interest me early. One of the things that I'm not sure about, but a lot of people say you've got to get yourself into this open and peaceful headspace to kind of open yourself up to these other things. Well, my experience as a child was I grew up in a very chaotic household. And I do mean that in a rather negative way. And I don't need the violins or anything. I just think that a lot of my experiences in childhood may have in some way opened me up to being sort of intuitive and sensitive to things. Now, I remember you saying in a podcast that you're anything but empathic. That's me too. I'm not empathic. I'm not talking about picking up on other people's vibes and emotions real quick, but I do in other respects have kind of a sensitivity to things. And I've had experiences of telepathic experiences, not under my control, things that you have no control of, and even a couple of premonition experiences. So I got into all this stuff very early, and my parents were even buying me books on the highly strange and unusual. And so I kind of was interested in all of it at a young age, not just the Bigfoot thing. And then I got to be a teenager, and I got interested in teenager things and hanging out and wanting to date girls and hang out with guys and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of dropped all that. It was when I was in my mid 20s and I'd moved up to North Georgia, had kind of had a longing to get into camping and just bringing a bunch of friends and camping and like maybe making a yearly trek down to this swamp down here, they call it. It's really a watershed. It's Okefenokee Swamp. And that's when I was pulled back into this for a moment, if that makes any sense. So I had an experience that occurred while I was in a canoe with a friend. And we were on this little tributary off of a lake called Billy's Lake in Okefenokee. We were just there to have fun, go canoeing, hang out at the camp, drink some beer, share stories, harangue each other a little bit like guys might do in big groups. Just stuff like that. There was nothing on my mind or radar about anything unusual. It just wasn't there. I'd gotten so far removed from it. And this incident that happened, it kind of like shook me out of that for a moment. It really surprised me and it freaked my friend out, who was actually my roommate as well. It freaked him out in my memory about this. It freaked him out so bad that he would never talk with me again after we initially talked about it in the boat. We knew we wouldn't be able to share this back at camp with the guys because we would never live it down. I want to add one caveat to this whole thing before I even share the story. This is back in, I believe, 1995. Bigfoot and all that stuff was not on my radar. The way that this thing came about shook me pretty good. And then my roommate wouldn't want to discuss it anymore. I couldn't share it with anybody else because I didn't have any friends who were open to that, except for my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And so I had to end up just tucking it in. I couldn't do anything with it. And the reason I bring all this up is I don't know how much you've looked into memory, but memories are really tricky. And the brain can really start to re edit things as you move through this so called thing we call time. And because I wasn't even prepared for it, I do say there are other experiences I've had since then that, even though they don't involve a visual, to me may have a lot more credibility in my own mind, simply because I had the intention of going out and looking for signs of these beings. And so when things would happen, it was like, yes, that's interesting. Whereas this kind of took me off guard, and then I couldn't even properly discuss it with my roommate. I don't know if it was his religious convictions that made him turn away from it, but I tried in the car on the drive back up to Athens to get him engaged, and he just wouldn't do it. He cut me off with short things like, "Oh yeah, that was really weird," and he just wouldn't elaborate. Whereas in the boat at the moment was that whole WTF thing. Like, what was that? So I'll give you what I remember, just sharing that. I don't know if my mind is turning this into something that it was or wasn't anymore because I wasn't prepared for it. But I'll just tell you what I remember. We're coming back. We'd gone up this tributary a good ways, probably for about an hour, just paddling gently. And it's pretty narrow. Like, at a guess from, once again, memory, it may have been 60, 80 feet wide, and sometimes getting much narrower. And we decided to turn around and come back. We wanted to paddle back and head back to camp and just kind of chill out and spend the rest of the afternoon at camp. So, as I recall, we were getting pretty close to Billy's Lake again, which is in that area of the Okefenokee, which is a huge place. It's like 450,000 acres. But in that area, it's about the biggest body of water that you're going to see down there, like open water. But even though it's called a lake, it really looks like a big river that just gets wide at some points. But this tributary, the has little tributaries off of it, and this one was way narrower than that. And we were getting close to Billy's Lake, and we heard up ahead and on our right. Now keep in mind, I'm in the back steering, and my friend is in the front of the canoe, and we're moving really peacefully. It's that really glass smooth water. It's like a mirror, and it's as I recall, a pretty windless day. We hear all this commotion up somewhere on a bank to our right side, roughly to our east as we're moving south. It's really thick up on the banks because this is summertime, so all the leaves on everything have grown back, and you've got not just the cypress trees and the cypress knees, but you've got yaw pond holly and all these other kind of undergrowth plants that really fill up the whole thing. So we couldn't see what was making the noise, and it wasn't a huge concern. My first thought it was probably an alligator splashed around, maybe it caught a fish near the bank. And I would guess that we were not only about 40 feet from that bank, but also 80 feet back. In other words, it's 80 feet ahead of us and 40 feet to our right. This is all guesswork, but just from memory, that's so we couldn't see anything, but I started seeing some commotion going on within the undergrowth. So then my mind just starts playing through what it could be. It's clearly something kind of large. So alligator, maybe it's a hog, a black bear, white-tailed deer. As I can think, that's the biggest fauna you're going to find. And there may be still remnant populations of panthers in there, and I'm pretty sure there probably are. But as we get closer and closer to being kind of parallel to this thing, all of a sudden we see this not slightly, but moderately hair covered being or creature stand up, but immediately start to turn its shoulders away from us. In other words, so that as it stands up, it's turning and it's going to have its back facing us. And this all is really fluid and happens pretty quickly. So it stands up like, I'm guessing it was in some kind of squatting position. It stands up, it turns, never get a really good look at what would have been the face of this thing. And it just starts to move back into the forest or into the cypress hardwoods and stuff. The thing, like, that I immediately noticed about it was it had shoulders on it. I have looked at a lot of imagery of bears when they are on their hind legs. I used to say bears have no shoulders. They do have a little teeny bit of what looks like shoulders, but it's so hard to notice from that neck. But it had shoulders on it that looked like, these weightlifters kind of overdo it with the trapezius and all this stuff, and they've
Yeah.
got these built up necks, and that's what it looked to me. And it's a common thing that I hear when I listen to other people's stories. It's like the head is kind of sitting planted either into the shoulders or even partially into the upper chest. And the closest I can give you to what it looked like to me is, have you ever seen a photo that's, I think it's owned now, but she's not the one who actually, I don't think it was her camera that took this picture. And I suspect it's a hoax. But even if it is a hoax, it's a really nicely done still shot from a game camera. The woman who supposedly has the rights to the photo is named Melissa Hovey. It was taken years back, supposedly in North Georgia, I think, or Middle Georgia. And that it's mostly the upper, it's the torso and the shoulders and the back of the head. And you can see like the hair is there. It's medium long, but it's not so thick that you can't see the skin through it. And I could see skin through this thing, and the hairs were kind of mottled brown, but it looked like there were gray hairs in there. But it quickly started to move away. And the freakiest thing about this whole incident was how quickly it happened and how quickly it moved away without running, and how it looked like it was just floating back into the forest. It didn't have this up and down gait. Like, I couldn't really see much below the low back. I saw a little of what looked like the motion, which obviously must be the legs. And to me, the way it appeared to me to be moving, it's like it was as if the torso were sitting on wheels and it just started rolling back into the woods. It reminded me of a woman when I was a teenager growing up in my neighborhood. She was a older lady who would jog through the neighborhood. She wore a long dress and a nice dress shirt and tennis shoes. And when she jogged, she just looked like she was floating across the sidewalk, this ghostly kind of float. It was always quite comical to me. But this didn't seem comical. It actually kind of freaked me out. And it really freaked Bob out. And we definitely, obviously, were like, what did we just see? My mind immediately, of course, went to Sasquatch. I hadn't thought about Sasquatch in years, but immediately it did. I couldn't help it. I wanted to talk more with him about this. I've even tried to find him on social media, and I can't. He's probably one of the few smart ones who's dodged that bullet. And then later that night in camp, I heard a cry that I assumed then was a fox. The neighborhood I live in now is loaded with red foxes. And I've also looked up red fox sounds. And I'm familiar with every kind of sound, their barks, their screams and howls and all that. And once again, in my recollection, this cry does not match anything I've heard, but I can't say what it was. It sounded to me like a very loud infant cry, like a human infant. But it was off in the distance. And so there may or be nothing to that, and it may not relate to the experience previous to the day. But that was it. And then so I tucked that away, and that was that.
So it's pretty frustrating for you in the fact that Bob pretty much, you said you talked in the canoe, but then after that, he just completely shut down. And now all these years later, still, of course, you can't find him. But even if you did, sounds like he wouldn't talk about this.
Yeah, that's a great question because, I haven't seen him since probably 1997. And who knows, but he was a funny guy. Like, on the one hand, he was kind of this burly guy who didn't seem to be real fearful until you got to know him. Like, one time when he was our roommate, I mentioned something about seeing some spiders on the outside screen of his bedroom window. And I just mentioned it. It wasn't like, the next thing I know, there's duct tape everywhere along the screen from the inside of his bedroom.
Sounds like something I would do. I hate spiders.
Yeah. So that's a good question. If I could find him, he might say I don't recall, or who
Right.
knows, and since I'm questioning my own memory on this one, I just know that in my memory, we discussed it in the canoe. We were obviously quite in shock about it. He seemed kind of taken to the point of really, I didn't ever feel fearful, or I didn't feel like there was no threat. To me, it was clear that we had snuck up on this thing unknowingly and annoyed it. Like, was it getting a drink of water, trying to catch something? I don't know. But it made it clear it wanted nothing to do with us immediately. So I was in shock at the experience, but never felt any kind of sense of threat about it.
Did you guys keep paddling up towards and past that point, or had you stopped and
We
retreated?
did. I don't think I would have had the fortitude to want to actually go up to the bank. And I know people think, oh, why didn't you go look for foot tracks? And it just didn't even occur to me. It really didn't. Now if that happened, I would be like, hey, okay, we're turning around. We're going to go poke the hornet's nest and see what's going on. But that didn't occur to me. It certainly didn't occur to him. And so we talked about it shortly, and we were still probably at a guess a mile and a half from where you would dock the boat. So shortly after that, we realized we couldn't go gleefully or otherwise back to the camp and say, guess what we just saw? We made an agreement. We're not bringing it up. We probably had 3 more days at the camping trip, and I just stuffed it down, had fun with the guys, thought maybe I could entice them in a conversation in the 6+ hour drive back to Athens, but that wasn't happening.
Bob was not having that silent treatment for you.
Silent Bob.
The fact that you stayed out there longer, at night, did you get a little creeped out every stick that cracked, or, even if it ended up being a deer or something identifiable, did it kind of make you a little more jumpy?
I don't recall. That's a good question, but I don't have much memory of. Maybe it was a thing where I was, going to sleep pretty quick, and because once again, you bring up great questions. Now, if I'm out in the woods anywhere, or and I start hearing that stuff, I'm very aware of it. I'm like, okay, now that was a decent sized snap. Would a deer's hoof with a 150-pound deer, would it be able to snap that? That's my mind's processing now, like going through everything. But I think I did such a good job of realizing that this was a nowhere road for now that I just decided to get back into this kind of male bonding mentality with beer and testosterone and playing wiffle ball and throwing jokes at each other and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and you didn't want to be the butt of the joke the whole weekend, right? Because it seemed like
I
Bob might have just completely denied the whole thing, been like, oh no, Phillips lost it. We didn't see that.
Yeah, and it's amazing what the mind can do when you have to, when you realize, I guess it's an automatic adaptation in the brain to, I can't do this right now. I'm going to put this here and compartmentalize this, or I'm going to rationalize it as this. And he must have been doing that, and I did it in my own way, since I immediately, my choice was to get frustrated and continue to push him at some point. And he just made it really clear that wasn't going to happen. And, I really liked him. I didn't want to mess it up because of my sudden interest in this thing that I hadn't thought about it. Really, I'm not saying maybe it didn't occur to me every once in a while, but literally since I was probably 10 years old, I had kind of just gotten out of all that stuff. And I'm like probably 27 years old at the time.
I know this is probably tough to gauge because of the distance you were back, plus you are down below it in a canoe, but can you guess about the height of the thing?
As I recall, it definitely wasn't like one of these 10-foot plus things that you hear about now. I would guess, because we did have it, we were, think about it, 40 to 60 feet, whatever we were from this thing. I don't think we were even 60 feet from the bank. So even though it was only at that spot briefly before it started moving away, that's a pretty close. I could see the muscles. I would say between 6 and 6.5 feet at a guess, but powerfully built, and not bulky either. Kind of ropey and powerfully built, with big shoulders, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like when you see basketball players now, they're obviously, even basketball players usually these days over 6.5 feet, but they're powerfully built, but they're more lean and ropey looking.
And I think I do know what picture you're talking about. It looks like a flash had gone off within 3 feet of the back of a Bigfoot, right? And you can see the top of the shoulders and the top of the back and then the back of the head. And you can see the skin through there too.
could definitely see what looked to me like a light grayish kind of skin. I know that light also plays on everything. Like what, and I do find it interesting, not to get off topic, that people say the hairs on them have a lot to do with how they appear and whether or not they can appear to disappear. Like these people have found these hairs that are completely like translucent, and that could be bringing in light and then reflecting back the environment around it. I don't know, but it appeared I wasn't like looking at a tree moving back into the woods. I was looking at what I thought I was like a being or an animal or and I don't just categorize these things as animals. I stay whatever that is. I mean, we're animals if you want to make that argument, but I
Right.
categorize them as part of the environment, and I'm very open to all possibilities as to what they are. But yeah, that was it until 2008. I got a call. Unless you want to ask me more questions, I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead. Thank you, Philip.
I got a call from my twin brother. He's all excited. Look, after this, I would start bringing up the subject, and I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear quit talking about Bigfoot. And if you get around our aunt, do not bring up Bigfoot. He's constantly doing that, trying to like micromanage what he thought our aunt could listen to and not listen to. And I usually didn't, rock the boat about that, but it was this weird control mechanism he had. But he had called me up all excited. You got to turn on the TV. They've caught Bigfoot in Georgia. They've shot one. And I'm like, what? So I didn't turn on the TV. I got online. And sure enough, I find this whole thing with this Bigfoot in a freezer. And I'm like, oh my God, this is ridiculous.
Yep.
And it was the Rick Dyer hoax. And I called him back. I said, Ken, just come on. You got to have a little more of a discerning eye. This whole thing is insane. It's so cheesy looking. And I'm not saying you should always prejudge something as cheesy if you don't know for sure. But that was my gut reaction, was this is total BS. The thing about that, though, is that's what got me back interested. I'd had to tuck it in for those years, like 13 plus years or whatever that amounts to. And the hoax is what got me back into the subject. So thanks to you, Rick Dyer.
Hey, it was good for something.
He's an interesting character to me. The fact that he was able to build this following and then hoax people at least 3 separate times, and then to watch the people use this rationale of why he was right this time and he was intentionally hoaxing last time, but he's really found something. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen. A lot of people argue about the Patterson Gimlin and talk about the kind of pretty cruddy history of Patterson. It's like, look, even if you made the argument that he was looking to make a hoax, you can't rule out the possibility that need was taken away from him just quite by chance. Because at the end of the day on all this, what counts is the subject matter in the film, not his backstory as being this kind of a character or not. And, I still stay open as to the verdict on it, but it's very hard for me to get my head around after all the work that's been done on that footage to show not only obviously clearly musculature, that if you look at Planet of the Apes, which I think was released around the same year with Hollywood's best and brightest with a large budget, and that's all they could do. And then you look at Patty and like, wait a minute, I'm seeing muscle flexion and contraction. And they've already shown the proportions, the body ratios are not human. Not that you'd have to find a tall, freakishly proportioned human. And I know people even debate about Patty's height. So fine. You still have to find probably at least a 6.5 foot human somewhere that has freaky proportions, because you can't fake proportions. The only thing they can do is like arm extensions when it comes to costumes, or I suppose leg extensions from the knee down. But the ratios tell a lot more than that. And I'm sorry I'm going off on a tangent on that, but it just, it became a huge point of interest for me to, obviously I really started digging down in that. But that's what got me back interested in it. And then I went up on a trip through Facebook. I'd gotten to a friend, somebody I'd known previously since kindergarten. She had found me on Facebook in 2010, and we became fast friends. And so in 2013, we decided, she and her husband and my wife Stacy and I were going to go up to the kind of northeast of Helen, Georgia. And all I have my mind on is Bigfoot. Not that I don't mind a nice relaxing time in the cabins, but that was my thing. It's like, I'm finally going to get back up into the woods and do a little bit of looking around and poking around. Keeping it quick on that one. I found my first foot track on a sandbank along the Soquee River. I found another possible heel print that had a long hair in it that I then properly folded into a paper football and then lost. And I got some interesting images in the mountain laurels through still shots, but they're debatable. It's the whole, you might be just seeing what you want to see kind of thing. But there was enough to intrigue me more. So I went back up to another part of the Georgia mountains in 2014. I was with my wife and we had our dog Douglas. And we went to a place off Highway 52, which is just west of Ellijay, Georgia. So not even too far from the Bigfoot Museum. So it's on that trip that every night I'm staying up on the porch, which overlooks a ravine. And I'm staying up late. And that's where I heard, well, actually, when we get there, so it's late, we get unpacked. The next morning, I get up early and I take the dog on a walk up the dirt road just to quote unquote see what I could see. This is one of those things, and in somebody else's view, it might be totally nothing. But you know, when you just have a gut feeling about something, it hits you immediately. So I'm walking up this dirt road, looking into the forest. And then when I say a voice in my head, I don't mean somebody else's voice. It's just like my own internal dialogue says to me, look down. So I look down, and there's a triangle made out of a stick. It was only one stick. It was broken, but not totally severed in two separate places and then fashioned. I say fashioned, which that's what I think it was, unless, we could say, well, nature fashioned it, but it was right dead center in the middle of the road. And I was just immediately struck that this was placed here. And I had a really gut feeling that it was sort of like, and that's where I immediately kind of got open to the possibility that there's a little more going on than just physical being. And then from there, that's where I heard my first wood knock while I was up at 3 a.m. on the porch, just looking out into the blackness. And it was just a lone wood knock. I would guess it was deep in the ravine and probably a half mile down from the cabin. A big, and you listen to things like that, and I've got tons of that kind of stuff now. It's not the sound of a branch snapping on its own and hitting the ground. It's the sound of a piece of hard, or at least it sounds like a piece of hardwood or something similar hitting something else very solid and making a really resonant. And of course, it echoed because it was moving through that ravine and all the trees. And that's where we found our, my first stick structure. Up above where we were camping, we went to a lake called Lake Conasauga, which is a man-made lake in the middle of the Cohutta Wilderness. So even further up into the mountains than this, where we were. I just had to get off trail. We were walking a trail up to the top of the mountain. I just happened to look up the embankment up and saw this clearly, a bunch of large branches, all situated sort of in a rough teepee position around a tree, maybe 50 feet off the path. So I went up there and filmed it and talked about it and then got back off trail. I've also got a few interesting recordings on there that I've never had anybody analyze. They're sounds that some type of animal's making, but it could be some bird I've never heard before. I don't know. And it's so faint, you really got to turn the volume up on it. But I still have all these tons of recordings that I someday want to get somebody to kind of look at. So that was that. Now I'm going to move into a story, if that's okay. That I told this story about a year ago, and I realized there's an art to storytelling. And in this story, I told way too much detail, and it was such a sad story, giving all the detail, that I brought the host down a little bit. I'm going to skip a lot of that detail. I go more for what happened, but I do have to say it is born out of a sad story. So for me, I had a twin brother, but I lost him. So I moved down to Florida in early 2015 for a job opportunity that I just couldn't pass up. And I talked with my wife about it, and she agreed. And it meant me being away for 3 weeks at a time or so, doing these stints down there and working 6 days a week, and then coming up maybe for a week to visit. And so I get settled in. This is in St. Augustine, Florida. Well, after the first couple of weeks, I immediately start scanning Google and looking for nearby areas that I could go out and start getting into the woods. And I found the 12-mile swamp, and started going out there. That's a little bit northeast of St. Augustine. And also the Bayard Conservation Area, which is off of the St. Johns River, so a little further east. And so Bayard was more of a drive, but it still wasn't a bad drive at all. So Sundays were my only day off. So usually on Sunday, that's what I would do, is I'd decide to go to also the Matanzas State Park, which sits more right along the coast, further south of St. Augustine. And so, between those three, I had plenty of places to go and walk and just be with nature. Or if I wanted to poke around a little bit more, I could film and do all that kind of stuff that we do. And so I had just gotten back from a visit up to Savannah and was just getting back to St. Augustine. It was on a Saturday. And I hadn't been there but a few hours, and I get a call from my sister that my brother's in the hospital. So I had to go back up to Savannah. And long story short, after a couple of weeks, he died. And so I decided to stay further instead of going back and coming back to the funeral and all that. So I was down there for several weeks. And I came back down. I was dead, decided I got to get back into work and just put all this behind me and just not think about it, try to stuff it down, which was not a smart thing to do. And then when the first Sunday came along, I had a day off. I was just going to hang around the house, but then I was like, well, I don't know if I really want to be just sitting here thinking about things. So I decided to go to the Bayard Conservation Area. This is another one of those things like the Triangle, but more intense, way more intense. So I get out there. There's nobody there. There's one parking area entrance, one main parking area entrance off this side of the conservation area to get in there. And so unless somebody walks to this place, and it's a pretty good walk from nowhere, you know what I mean? There's not other people in there. You'll know when there are. And I hadn't seen a soul. And I'm walking down this, what would you call it? The roads that are made for the state workers, it's just like a one
service
lane
road?
Service road, like a dirt road.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I'm walking down that because this thing will take me back towards the river where I can sit on a log and just kind of hang out. But I was also mindful about what was going on around me. So I'm sort of in that mode. I'm trying to keep myself like, oh, I'm out here poking around, trying to see what's going on. But quickly my thoughts turned over to my brother. And at some point I just broke down crying. I couldn't deal with it. And I just became this real mess. Like, oh my God, this is terrible. What am I doing? Why am I out here? And I'm just walking and crying and walking and crying. And then, eventually I got a little more calmed down. I started hearing this noise in the trees to my left. So from that service road, there's a little bit of like a grassy area, maybe about 20 feet or less. And then it just goes into the forest. And these are really thick forests with all talk about undergrowth and scrub and stuff, but also these pine trees, lots of pine trees. And so I'm hearing something in there, sticks popping and things like that. And I keep looking, but there's no way to see into what's there. So this is that. And so I'm headed back towards the river, and I keep hearing this for a bit, and then it goes silent. And so I just keep walking towards the river. And I get to this downed tree, and I sit down on there and just kind of look at the river and the boats going by and stuff. And I thought to myself, well, there's not going to be any more of this squatching today. I'm not doing this. So I got up and I started walking back to head to the car. And right when I got close to the spot where I'd heard the stuff on my left, which would now, of course, be on my right, I looked down and there's this plucked yellow flower. It's got a green stem, and it's got, I think, like if I recall, like a orangey center and then yellow petals. If you ever recall when you pull like a weed or something, like I used to always pluck weeds as a kid for some reason. And this, I don't know what it's like. It's a glue-like white substance that will come out of where you plucked it. It's almost like the plant's bleeding and whatever it is. I don't know what that white substance is, but that's what was on the end of it, which you see immediately when you pluck something like that. And I looked around and there were no flowers like that growing anywhere in view, like anywhere. There just wasn't. There was grass and weeds, but no little green stem, yellow petaled flowers. And I really was taken aback by it. And the thing looked very fresh. It was still extremely fresh. And this is in getting towards early summer, and it was warm. It wasn't quite like obviously it gets in July, but it was very warm. And so I carried the flower, and I just kind of looked off into the woods, and like in case my instincts were right, I said thank you, and I walked to the car with the flower, and by the time I got to the car, the flower was wilted, and that was probably way less than 20 minutes is probably what the walk was. So it definitely had been freshly plucked, and it wasn't plucked from anywhere where it was sitting, and there wasn't anything nearby in view. So that's one of those really. So everybody, I know this. If I can segue on that for a minute to talk about what we perceive these things as, I know, as you know, that there's so many camps on this, and it's not just Bigfoot. It's UFOs, it's ghosts, it's any kind of paranormal phenomena, it's politics, it's fine dining. I mean, it's our nature to just divide off into different camps and automatically kind of get into these factions that are like, oh, that's absurd. Like, I've realized, even though at this point I just don't view these things as upright walking apes, I don't need to put down somebody that's their view. Like, there's a lot with certain high level researchers in this field that I disagree with, but I realize they do bring something very important to the table with whatever that contribution is. As opposed to, oh, this guy just thinks they're this, and there's clearly this going on. And it's the opposite is true. Like in that interview with the guy that Mount Shasta that you were interviewing, I noticed he kept saying, this is probably going to get rid of half your audience. It's like, well, don't worry about it. She's got her audience, and they can disagree if they want to. But I've had a mixture of experiences that range from extremely terrifying to ones that show the possibility, unless my imagination is getting best of me, one there where there can be compassion and a need to possibly seek communion of some sort. They're clearly curious. Like, on the one hand, they may recognize that we could pose a huge threat to them, just like some of us think they're a huge threat to us. But they clearly are curious. They do come in. They do want to know something, just like we do. That's my observation. So that's where that left me.
By the way, can I just add with the whole flower story? I think that to me just adds such a nice layer to things, considering it, and you've already said it, because these experiences can run the gamut, that I don't know quite what to make of that, because I don't know where else that flower would have come from. You didn't notice any other people there, and the fact that you mentioned it was freshly plucked, you had the white substance, and then the fact that it wilted within 15 to 20 minutes, that says quite a bit.
And I will agree with critics who are going to say correlation is not causation, and I agree with that. I cannot say, obviously, definitively, this is what that was, but correlation can be reason to at least question and inquire more. And so we have this situation where clearly there was something making snaps and pops in the woods. I'm clearly a blubbering idiot, walking down this dirt road. And then coming back, right near the same area in the road is this flower. Now, I can't say I didn't see the flower coming in, because I was in such grief, I wasn't even looking. I may have been looking down, but I wasn't really. Your environment gets really weird when you go into a mode like that. Everything just kind of fades out from your senses and your field of vision. It was only that when I started coming to a little bit, got myself together, that I kind of became more aware of my surroundings again. So yeah, I can't say what that was, and I wouldn't say what it was, but I will say it was very interesting, and it's one of those things. And it's like when people talk about I used to have a lot of books on crop circles and people debating about that. Well, this is a bunch of humans with computers and boards and sticks and da 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 da. But then there's the ones that I don't know if you ever read any of that stuff, but like they would take these crop circles and put them up on a grid. And even these ones that were made by people designing them on computers and then going out at night and doing them, they look great, but they don't match up on a grid. They don't have that consistency. They're kind of off center. And then there are ones that are put onto a grid and they're perfect. So the reason I bring that up is because some people have speculated that we'll never know what the crop circles are. They're just here to raise our questioning, our inquisition about things, our curiosity, our consciousness, you know? So a moment like that for me is the same thing with the flower. It's like, well, I'll never know what happened, but I know that it was a moment that really got my attention and snapped me out of something and showed whether it's my imagination of compassion or not, that doesn't matter.
That was what you got out of
You
it.
know,
It made you feel better. You said thank you out into the ether, no matter what brought it.
exactly. That's right. So, I went through the year working down there and then, well, backtracking a little bit, before all that happened, like in March of 2015, my wife calls me up and says she's pregnant. And I was like, what? you know, I thought she was going through the change of life prior to this, and I went, you can't be pregnant at 47. That's just not. And we'd always vowed we'd never have kids. Like, really, though, it was my selfish butt constantly saying we don't need kids. Look at this world. And I know I'm too selfish of a person to ever raise a child and all this stuff. And, she really did want kids. And eventually we came to this agreement to keep trying, but we knew it's like, we're in our 40s. This is ridiculous. But she got pregnant. So first thing I did is go out and get a bottle of Jack Daniels. Not to celebrate, but like to just get my head around this, or dim it down. But he's been the absolute joy of life. And so because of that, he was due in October. And I was working for a group of conservators down there. We were refurbishing Flagler College. It was all for this upcoming 450th anniversary of St. Augustine being, the country's oldest city. So all these hotels and big buildings and things, and, like the Flagler College, which if you've never seen it, pull it up on YouTube. It's just an incredibly beautiful piece of architecture. And these conservators are kind of like contractors with PhDs. And I'm not one of those, but at a wedding by chance, somebody overheard me saying something about painting houses and glazing windows. This is back in 2014, and I know I'm going backwards, but she said, "Oh, you're a painter? You want a job?" And I was like, "Doing what?" She starts explaining it and the money and all. I'm like, "Yes, I want a job." So that's what got me down there. But they're kind of a subculture, just like in the cooking world, which is I spent most of my time in, was in kitchens. There's all these subcultures behind different careers, it seems like. And they're mostly single, no kids. So that's the kind of a person that the boss wants because he wants to be able to move them around a lot. They move around the country refurbishing all these grand historic places. And for some reason, I think he just thought, well, you're going to have a child here. And so he said, just why don't you go on home in October, early October, and just get back with me sometime after Christmas. So basically, he let me go. So in a nice way. Although I love my time down there. I made some great friends with those people. So, I was getting settled back in Savannah and, having a child and learning that. And I started getting itchy by that time next year, fall of 2000 or late summer of 2000. I was starting to get kind of itchy to get back out in the woods because I hadn't done any of that. Hurricane Matthew came along. Can't remember if that was August or September. It was, anyway, we decided to leave, to just not take any chances if this thing did turn into a Cat 3 or greater and make a direct landfall. And so we went up to the same spot I went to, I told you about in 2014, where I heard my first tree knock and got the triangle. We went up to those same cabins. It's called Wilderness View Cabins. It's still there. I think it's a different ownership now. It's on Highway 52 west of LJ. And we had even rented the same cabin because we liked that one so much. But when we got up to LJ and I called the person at the rental place, she said, "We've had an incident. Can you take a different cabin?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" She said, "Well, as you know, that storm that hit y'all moved up through here. And there's a real steep dirt road that took you back down to the cabin. That was all washed out." So she said, "Will you be willing to take Black Bear Cabin?" And I said, well, I don't guess I have a choice. So we took Black Bear Cabin, and it turned out to be an awesome trade because Black Bear Cabin was a larger cabin with a game room downstairs and just lots of space. And it was, the most important part to me was it was on a cul-de-sac with no other cabins, and the backyard was just pure Coheta wilderness going all the way through the rest of North Georgia up to Tennessee. So miles and miles of forest. And most of the other places along the road down to the cabin were actually mansions speckled here and there, and they're not occupied. They're just people trying to sell them. So there wasn't really anybody down that road at all. And there's no walking trails in the area. So that was like, this is perfect. We've got the forest in our backyard. We're not impeded by a couple of neighbors real close. Not that I realize now that doesn't even really matter, but at the time that seemed ideal to me. So we had to back the car down into the driveway, kind of went downhill to the backyard. And it was dark when we got there. And at this point, let's see, Elliot is almost 1 year old, almost one. And we've got our dog, Douglas. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Douglas in a bit. And I'm going to keep referencing occasionally your podcast because I've been kind of digging into them. And there was one recently that I listened to where they were going to ski in this area, I think up in Montana. And when they got into the encampment or where they made camp, they started hearing like they were being triangulated by knocks and things, double knocks. And they got really spooked about it and decided to take the 5 mile or 4 mile walk back out or whatever it was. And I remember the one guy saying the way his dog was responding to what was going on in the woods at night. He'd seen his dog respond to bears. He'd seen his dog respond to all types of wildlife, and his dog was responding very differently to what was going on in the woods. And that'll play into when I get to that point as relates Douglas, my dog. I got kind of the heebie-jeebies, honestly, when I backed down to that driveway and I started having to load the luggage into the back door. I just got this hair on the back of the neck feeling. It was really dark in the backyard. There wasn't like a spotlight on or anything. And so I was unloading the stuff and very quickly moving up the stairs and into the back door where Stacy had opened it up for me and getting the luggage in and just getting inside. I just had this. It's probably just my imagination since I have a pretty wild imagination. But we get settled in. The next morning I get up. So there's about 20 feet of yard space in the backyard before it gets to the tree line. And overseeing the yard was a deck on the upstairs where the grill was and all that. And so I immediately went out the backyard and went into the tree line. And I quickly found a tree that had a large branch about 9 feet up into just kind of laying on top of the other branches. And this branch, from whatever tree it came, was not from that tree. It was way bigger than any branch on the tree. And there were no surrounding trees, not even tall enough to begin with, to hover over the tree to drop the branch in it. Like, it was not from anything I could see nearby. So I immediately was like, okay, this is interesting. So I went a little deeper into the wood line and I got 3 sticks that were all roughly about a foot long, and just try to work with me as I describe it as best I can. I made a triangle on the ground with those 3-foot long sticks. Then I found a snail shell and I put it dead center of that triangle with the whole side, the side the snail would come out of, sitting down. Purposely, I'm just being creative. I'm not thinking of any formulas. And then I took 2 more sticks and I put them across the triangle like an equal sign. The one was above the snail shell and one was below it. So it forms this, you've got a triangle straddled across the center with an equal sign and a snail shell right in between those 2 parallel equal sign sticks, if that makes any sense. And I left it there and went back to the cabin. We just kind of hung out that day. A little later on in the afternoon, I decided to take Douglas on a walk to go do his business and just kind of look around. As I got around the other side of the cul-de-sac, I'm one of these guys, like, I will do tree knocks. I will. And I will probably do some dumb things. Like, I hear these people talk about either being dumb or smart or disrespectful or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't like being disrespectful, but I do like kind of pushing the envelope if I can get a reaction from something or someone. I found a good, strong down pine branch. And at the other side of that cul-de-sac was immediately a ravine that went down probably 100 and something feet. And I just did one single loud knock. Only a few seconds later, it comes back 3 knocks in succession, but they sound like mine sounded more like a nice baseball pop fly. Real crisp and loud, more of a higher timbre on the upper end. These sounded like trees hitting trees. I don't know what was going on, but, and this is another thing I'll do, and you'll hear me talk about this more. I talk to the woods. I do, because you never know, right? So I will talk out. So after I got those 3 tree knocks back, I said, listen, I'm just here out of curiosity. I don't mean any harm. You know, if there's any way you can let me know I'm doing something wrong, please do it. I always do stuff like that now. Just, it can't hurt, right? I may just be a lunatic talking to the woods, but that's the way I feel about it, because I feel like everything is alive in some way anyway. So I did one more knock and I got the exact same thing back. And that's definitely from below me, down in the ravine, somewhere in that area. They're coming up from that ravine. So 3 more, boom, boom, boom. So I am just like, it's like I just got a shot of adrenaline. I'm like, Douglas is just staring down that ravine and it's got this look on, like, what's going on, Daddy? What's going on? Like, I don't know, man. So I didn't want to, I felt like, I didn't want to push my luck. I admit, I don't know what I'm communicating when I do a tree knock. I have no idea. That's why I just tend to always do a lone knock. I just feel like, the interesting thing is, I used to, when I tried them, I would try threes. There's this thing about threes, right? People just orient towards threes. And it's interesting that I would do a lone one and get 3 back. But I decided after that, to say thank you if that was you or whoever you are down there. I'm going to go back into the cabin now. So I started walking away, and I did say, if that really was you, if you could just give me some kind of confirmation. And I stood there for about 30 seconds and nothing happened. And I thought, okay, so let me just walk back to the cabin. So when we got back around to the other side of the cul-de-sac, and the cul-de-sac, keep in mind, has a stand of trees in the middle of it. It's not like one you see like in a suburban neighborhood. It's got this huge stand of trees right in the center of it. So it's a circle around a group of trees. Right when I got around the other side of the cul-de-sac, just one lone knock, and it wasn't as low, and it wasn't as low pitched as those other 2 sets of threes. So
weird.
I was just all excited about this. This was just still nothing but kind of feel good vibes. I'm communicating with these people, or whatever they are. And I went back in. I decided to go back out just out of curiosity and check the little triangle I made. Well, nothing, it was unchanged completely, which I expected. We hung around the cabin that day and just kind of relaxing, and I'm making a nice lunch, and then eventually it's afternoon and we're still just hanging out. And Elliot's watching TV. It's getting on dinner, so I'm starting to work on dinner on the porch. The porch has that direct view of the back woodline, so I'm just constantly, obviously, looking down into the woodline, even though it's getting towards sundown now. And I had a lot of uneasy, dark experiences as a child. When I would go to bed at night, I was not an easy sleeper. I was very hyper afraid of ghosts as a kid, and I suffered a lot of night terrors and other nightmares. And so still sometimes nighttime brings that kind of thing on for me. So I got more uneasy looking into the forest as it got darker. But I didn't hear anything or anything like that. So I finish up with the grill and we get dinner inside and we have dinner. And then I get back onto the couch to watch some TV. Stacy was doing something in the kitchen. She was working on some kind of little dessert. And Elliot was sitting on the couch with me. And all of a sudden, there's this huge thwack against the outside wall of the cabin. Stacy is somebody who does not spook. Okay, she doesn't spook. Like, I remember when she and I watched The Exorcist. And I'd already seen it as a kid, but we rewatched it in our 20s. And I'm just like getting all back into that. Oh my God, I've got goosebumps. She's like, what is so scary about this? She just doesn't spook. But when that, whatever it was that whacked the cabin did that, she said, what was that? And I was like, I don't know. And to give you an idea of the cabin, yes, the cabin is in the woods, but they cut yard space and driveway space around all sides of the cabin. So there are no overhanging trees, not even lightly overhanging the edge of the roof. It wasn't like it was a storm where branches could be blown sideways. So this whacking on the cabin walls starts occurring at intervals of every 10 to 15 minutes. And I am on edge. This is really alarming to me. And of course, like a lot of things that I've experienced for the first time, it's always like, oh my God, this is the stuff I've been reading about for a couple of years now, smacking on the walls of the cabin. I can't help but go there. I've read about it. And, you're in a lighted house and it's dark outside. So you have no view from your windows from what you perceive as the safety of your cabin. And whatever might be out there has a complete view like they're watching a television. So that really kept me on edge. I did go out because I had to. Now, this is where Douglas comes into play. Douglas, if you got any, I should have sent you a picture of him, but he was about a 60-pound dog. He looked like a combination of a spaniel, like a Springer Spaniel, and a Border Collie, and with more on the Spaniel side. But beautiful dog. Had that bird dog look to him, though, more so than Border Collie. Super fun, super happy-go-lucky dog, very naughty dog. Like the minute you turned your back in the kitchen, if you had raw steaks on the counter, boom, they're gone. Off into another room. He goes real quietly. Super naughty, but super loving and fun dog. And he loved the outdoors. Like where we live, there are a good stand of woods. And he loved, if I was letting him out, hopefully he would stick in the yard. The moment he got to get away from me, he'd run across the street into the woods, chasing deer. And he didn't want to attack the deer, in my view. He wanted to play with them. Of course, they're terrified. And he would disappear for 30 minutes, and I'd always worry. Then he'd come back soaking wet from getting back in the creek over there. That was Douglas. He didn't even have fear of larger dogs, that he would chase them, wanting to play with them. And like, there's a neighbor that had a 120-pound Doberman. Douglas would just lunge at him in a playful way, though, and that dog would take off running. So he wasn't an aggressive dog at all. He just thought the world was his playground. So I was like, well, shoot, I've got to take him out there to go do his business before we go to bed. I was not wanting to do this at all. But I was like, okay, Philip, man up. Just let's get Douglas out. I wasn't even thinking about Douglas. I thought he wouldn't be able to wait to get out there. Well, I put his leash on, and I go out the front door towards the cul-de-sac, and he's not budging. I'm pulling on him. He is looking at me with this puppy dog look like, Dad, don't make me do this. And he just looks terrified. And I'm like, Douglas, come on now. What are you doing? And I pulled him, and eventually I hated pulling on him because like he's resisting and I don't want to choke him, but I'm like, he's going to end up peeing on the floor or something in the middle of the night. So I managed to coerce him about 20 feet off the porch, and he wouldn't do it. He kept insisting on pulling, and he just looked so terrified. And so when I was thinking about telling you about that part of this trip, it made me think of that guy that you had interviewed about the ski trip in Montana or wherever it was, where he said he knows his dog. I knew my dog. This was not normal for him. He was picking up on something out there at night that he seemed to be a little more okay with during the daytime, but not at night. So, this is after the cabin's been being whacked several times.
Just real quick, Phil, before you keep going. You mentioned that the back door and then where the wood line started was about 20 feet, right? Does that
25 feet?
Yeah. Does that occur on the sides of the cabin as well until you hit wood line?
Well, on the just for argument's sake, if you were facing the front door, the left side of the cabin is where the driveway is, which goes all the way into the backyard.
Okay.
That driveway was probably a good 14 feet across. It's about, probably to guess, the innermost edge of the concrete is probably 5 feet off of the cabin, at which point there's just dirt and stuff. So that's more feet. And then there's another little grassy area off the driveway before you get into the wood line there. So maybe even more space on that side of the house. On the other side, it was there wasn't as much space on the right side of the house if you're facing the front door. But yeah, as a matter of fact, definitely the brush probably came to within maybe 12 feet or so from the right side, maybe 15 feet.
So, because what we know of these creatures, I mean, they could easily throw something from that distance and have it still hit the cabin with force.
That's a good point. I do recall going out and looking for whatever. I don't recall finding anything, but you're right. They can definitely, that definitely could have been the case. And who knows, it could even be picked up again. And this happened every night for the rest of our
oh my gosh
vacation.
And you never once found anything that could be the culprit?
No. If they were rocks, they would definitely be bigger than your average size little pebble or piece of granite. As a matter of fact, I didn't see any damage on the walls of it was like cedar wood cabin.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see damage on the outside walls. So, once again, you bring up good points, though. I'm picturing a hand smacking the cabin.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking they just came up to the cabin and smacked it.
Which means I picture running out of the woodline real fast, smacking the cabin, and then running back in the woodline. And I hear a lot of people say that's probably the younger ones, and I don't know if that's true, but that might make sense. Like, just like humans, at that age, we're not only just out of control, we don't always even necessarily think in terms of, is this prudent?
And you're testing things too.
Testing things out.
Was it on the same wall each time?
As I recall, it was always on the right side. So once again, facing the front door, the right side where that brush would be closer. So now the bedroom where we slept was on the side by the driveway. And of course, I was always nervous because my head's right by the window there. Once we went to bed, I never heard anything. Nothing woke me up. Down the road in this story, I'll tell you something else that did occur on the back porch. But so we decided, to get out and do a little bit. We're up in the mountains. We usually go to Fort Mountain. I've found a lot of evidence in Fort Mountain, these two different trips there. And I got footage of tracks in the mud at a lake in Fort Mountain, right not far off of a lake. There was a real muddy area. And there's all these barefoot tracks. They're kind of small, like 7 to 9 inches, and they all vary in how they appear. One of the freakiest looking ones, I tried to match it up later against everything from a beaver to anything I could think of in the area. Bear tracks, obviously. And it did not match anything. And then some of them had a little more classic footprint look, like, just fairly proportional. But some of them were wide at the top and very narrow at the bottom, but very triangular almost, really weird. Like, maybe later I'll send you some of that stuff. But so we did a lot of hiking in Fort Mountain, both these times, the 2014 trip and this time we did. Of course, this time I've got this baby slung on this thing on my back, and I'm trying to navigate rocks and stuff. And that was definitely a challenge for me because I didn't want to trip and fall and throw him over. But, this area is full of bears. Like, this part of North Georgia is loaded with bears. I don't have a lot of experience with them except up in this part of Georgia. My experience with the bears that we've encountered up there is they're not necessarily going to be aggressive, but they also don't appear too afraid of you. Like on our first trip up there with Douglas in 14, before we had Elliot, we're going along a trail and we're kind of on the top of a hill. So you can't really see over the hill because it's far enough. It starts declining far enough away from us that you can't look over the edge to it. And we're hearing the crunching of leaves coming. We're like, what is that? Is that like a bunch of deer coming up? And then eventually you see this big black head, and then you see this body, and it's this huge black bear. And I say huge, meaning for North Georgia. Like, the further south you go, the smaller the black bear get. I know the black bear probably up in Pennsylvania and New York get a good bit bigger, but this was a good 350-pound bear. And once again, Douglas, he's not terrified at all. I'm glad I had him on a leash. He wanted to go play with the bear. And the bear's just standing there sniffing the air. And I'm like, do I need to get a stick, just in case? And I'm freaking out, and I'm trying to keep him from wanting to run to the bear. So I'm holding him and trying to look around for some type of protection because I have no bear spray or anything on me. And then after a few minutes, the bear just ran off. But it was like, okay, I know what y'all are. You're not a threat. He just did not seem afraid. And the bears that we encountered near the cabin didn't really seem afraid either. And the reason I bring that up is because we went walking on the little road up to the cabin one day as a family, with just me taking Douglas out. And we decided to take the Segway down an area that would take you down into that spot near where the bottom of the ravine was, where I got the knocks. Now, you know what my ideas are. I want to go investigate. I'm not telling Stacy that. Not that she, of course, knows my almost obsession with the subject now. So we go down there and we come up. There's a little driveway that goes to these huge wrought iron gates that look like these things are designed for a mansion. Clearly, you don't put a little bungalow up with gates like that. It'd be absurd. And the gates are open, so we go on in, and it's clear there was at some point intentions to develop something right there, a building or a house. But due to looking at how things had grown over from where all the cut stuff was, it was clear that either that was totally halted or they just were taking their time because the undergrowth had come back up quite a bit. So it looked like an abandoned project to me. Oh, there's one thing I should add. The night before this walk, Elliot was watching, I think, one of the Ice Age movies on TV. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, I sure am. Those are funny as heck.
Well, one of them, I think it's like if they're trying to rescue this little cave boy or something or get him back to his family. I don't know. I just know at one point at the end of this movie, there's a little cave boy. He's got this big furry head. And Elliot's looking at the TV. Now, keep in mind, he's about one, and he is speaking a little bit, of course. And but not, there's not like a big run-on sentences or anything. But I pointed to the TV and I said, "Look, Elliot, there's a baby." Now this may mean nothing, and as far as your audience goes, I acknowledge anything. I'm just going to bring up anything that to me is possibly a point of interest. So we're walking around this would-be development, and off to one side is above us. It kind of goes uphill, and there's a huge stand of trees getting back into the forest, and we're starting to walk back out of it. Elliot points up at the trees up the hill, and he says, "Baby." I was like, "What?" He's just pointing up there saying baby. And I'll never know if that meant anything at all. But I was like, the night before I pointed out a baby that has a big furry head and he's looking up at the woods. And I will say this about babies, and they're like born little Buddhas, they're just amazing. And it's as they grow up, unfortunately, society and adults beat all that amazingness out of them, that observation. Like, even though I was terrified of ghosts, just like, what was that saying that Kurt Cobain, just because you're paranoid don't mean they're not after you?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, that didn't mean they weren't there. I was either just hyper aware of them or maybe it was my imagination, but I really do think that children are way more sensitive to their environment. And then we keep going, oh, that's not real. Let's, grow up. But once again, that's conjecture on my part, but it did strike me. I kept trying to get at him where he's saying there's a baby up there and he just kept smiling up in the woods. But so I know I ramble a little bit, but I always try to get back to the point. So we go through the gates and we go back up to where the main little road is. And I noticed this kind of grayish muck coming out of the dirt right off the side of the road. It struck me because as I got closer, I saw all these, I don't remember if they were yellow jackets or bees, but some type of bee flying around. Like they were clearly just disturbed. And there's certain hive species that burrow in the ground, right?
Right.
I think yellow jackets do that a lot. Because one time when I was pressure washing a house and I got a little bit at the bottom of the house near the dirt where the hedges were, that was it. I got whacked hard. So this was clearly some kind of nectar, but it didn't look like the kind of nectar you would think, like a nice golden, delicious looking nectar. It almost had a clay-like look to it, sort of light gray, but the bees were swarming around, and it was coming out of a hole. The most important part about this is there were finger impressions dragging through that chunk of clay-like nectar. And I took a picture of it, and I kept telling myself, bear, we must have come up on a bear, and it was pulling at the nectar to eat it, and we disturbed it. And this is why I noted earlier that bears generally seem afraid of us. And I would think, especially if they're the food source, but maybe I'm wrong. They might get more defensive. But I kind of tucked that in. I took a picture of it. I started re-examining that picture back on the computer once I had uploaded it. And I decided to look up bears. Can bears retract their claws? No, they can't. So what this looks like to me is if you took your fingers, your four main fingers at least, beside your thumb, and you drug them through something where it would make an impression. And to use a phrase that's often used in terms of Bigfoot footprints, you could clearly see the pressure ridges that were raised in between each finger as it pulled through it. But there were no claw marks. None. There was no, like, that should also be interrupted in between each pressure ridge by a nail mark, I would think. But once again, it's a thing that I kind of looked at in hindsight. I'll never really know. I thought maybe when we were walking down to the area and before we got to the gates, we might have disturbed one that was busy getting some nectar out of the ground.
That's pretty cool. I would like to see that pic.
I'll definitely send you that pic. I got, this, the weird thing, I got on this, I rebooted this old computer, and that's where the pics were. And I just recently went to get that particular set of pics, and I realized they were on the computer downstairs. I might have them in my phone. The computer downstairs completely fried us. I have other people that interact with these computers, and they don't know at all what they're doing, and computers get viruses. And so that's why I uploaded this older. I got this other computer rebooted again, but I'll dig and dig. It's probably on the phone, and the phone thing is another interesting part of this story. So this is kind of the longest succession of experiences, I think, in one little trip. We get back home, we do our thing. As usual, the knocks at night. The next day, I go back out in the morning, and I go back to the wood line. The triangle that I had made with the snail in the middle with the whole side down and the equal side straddling the snail shell across the triangle. Well, now both of those sticks that form the equal sign are still perfectly parallel, but on the lower part, the flat part of the pyramid at the bottom. And up in the point of the pyramid, what you might call a capstone if you were looking at the dollar bill, is the snail shell, perfectly at the top with the whole side now up. And I played this over in my mind. I was like, could by happenstance, a raccoon or a possum disturb this so that it happened to perfectly fall in place? And you can't rule that out. Weird things do happen, right? But I kept taking pictures of all this stuff. And of course, pictures aren't proof. Like, anybody could go, well, Philip, you did all that and just took pictures of it and said, just like all these glyphs I sent you pictures of, I can't prove it to anybody that I didn't do. And it's like the guy brought up, the Mount Shasta guy that you interviewed. It's like he had this thing about bringing up cameras and voice recorders. I realize cameras generally seem like, as they call it, squatch repellent. When I bring in voice recorders, I talk to the forest and I say, look, I'm placing this thing here. It will not capture your visual image, but it does capture audio. Give me a knock or so if you don't want me doing this. That was pretty much the gist of that that particular trip. Does anything you want to add before I move on? I definitely want to get to at some point, but I'm trying to tie things in a little bit of a story to that shower image. But you let me know where we are time-wise and anything you want to say.
No, we're doing good. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that shower incident image. You mentioned an extremely terrifying or more than one extremely terrifying incidents. Had you already covered those or had you not gotten there yet?
Well, I'll be honest with you. The knocks on the cabin, the knocks on the cabin terrified me. And the other one was of pure, once again, one day there at the cabin, I decided to go deeper into the woods. Yeah, I was just poking around 20 feet into the woods. So I said, let me go deeper into this. And it was pretty thick getting in there. It's not just like some forests, it's like all these grand, majestic trees and then all this nice space to walk where you're not pushing through little saplings and undergrowth, This was like lots of that kind of stuff. So it was kind of tough moving through it. But, not the worst. It's not like the Amazonian jungle or something. So I keep pushing through, and eventually it starts going downhill. And so eventually it went downhill to a creek. This terrifying is just my imagination coupled with the experiences that I had up to that point. I decided I was going to traverse this pretty steep downhill to the creek. I lost my footing and slipped all the way down the hill of the creek. Okay, that was interesting. But then I was like, okay, well, I probably should try to get back up. This looks kind of like it's going to be harder to climb. There's a lot of leaf litter everywhere that was very slippery. And that's kind of why I lost my footing to begin with. So I started trying to climb back up the hill, and I'm trying to pull on saplings, but I keep losing my footing, and I just can't manage to get myself up. And then panic set in. I thought, these things are somewhere down in here. They're coming out of the yard somewhere and smacking the cabin, possibly. So surely they're probably watching me. That's what my mind's telling me. And the more that occurred to me, the more panicky I got. I kept deciding I'd travel down the creek to see if I could find a slightly shallower embankment. And I just kept finding the same steep embankment going up to the backyard property. Eventually, I was away from our property and onto other areas, and that was pretty scary. Granted, it was my imagination, but you know how that gets when you think there's something behind you. You know, you don't want to turn your back, and you just all want to do now is get back up that hill. Yeah, I've had I've had a number of those. I did have a terrifying experience right here outside of Savannah in one of my areas that I go to. But I guess I could just segue into that real quick. This was last year, so I found a lot of structures in this area. This is literally just a few miles outside of Savannah, in a place called. And I have no issue with telling people where things are. I'm not worried about people moving into my territory and that stuff, but it's a place called Blue Sky Preserve, and it's on Highway 144, just west of 95, about a mile. And it's a little, I think it's a county-run wildlife management place, and I go in there, and I discovered it through somebody else who told me about it because I, by happenstance, found a YouTube of this person walking around filming herself with a selfie, and I just had this feeling, this look, I don't know why, my gut feeling said, this looks like Savannah. Is this possibly the Savannah Woods? It reminded me of an area called the Ageechee Canal Historic Site, which is also off 144. So I sent a little note on YouTube, and she said, this is in Savannah. I was like, whoa. So anyway, she introduced me to this place, and I've been going there ever since. And I find teepee structures, I find tree breaks and twists and things that are like, okay, let me use my brain. If I were able to even break this sapling and twist it, why is it wrapped then around a tree where it should logically, if it broke from the wind, just be on this side of the tree, but somehow the branch is curved and wrapped around the other side, things like that. I found a lot of that stuff. So I found this new teepee structure made with pines up against another pine. And eventually I started seeing things into the woods because this teepee structure is right off the walking trail. I'm trying to go, well, could this be human made? It could be. It's not like on the scale of some of these things out in Colorado, right? Where a human couldn't do it just from strength unless you had equipment, I think. But because of all the other things I'd found there, I thought it was intriguing. But if I start seeing these things in the ground, deeper into the woodline, like the 30 feet, that looks like something there, and I'd go and I'd check it out, and it wasn't really anything. It was just something that looked interesting from a distance. And I'm keeping a bead on where I am in relation to the trail. And I'm like, yeah, you're only going 100 feet in, you're fine. And the trail makes a hard left turn, and if you go this way, you should go back to the beginning of et cetera, et cetera. And I really felt like I hadn't gone more than 200 feet in, which means I shouldn't be more than obviously 200 feet from that point where the teepee structure is, and I shouldn't be more than a couple hundred feet from where it took a hard turn. Either way, I should be really close to a trail. And the sun was going down, and I decided to move towards the closer part where it took the hard left. I think I said hard right earlier, but looking at it from that, it would be a hard left. So I just start walking. And I'm not kidding you, 5 minutes goes by, and I felt like I should have reached the trail within less than a minute. And I'm just walking, and time is going by. I start like getting that same feeling I had down at the cabin that I just told you about. And it must have taken me 10 minutes to get to the trail. I was in panic at that point. I thought, I'm all turned around here. And the same thing happened to the woman who, and I'm not saying I went through some silly portal or anything. I don't mean silly. Certainly, I just don't think I was in a portal. I think somehow I got myself turned around, and I thought I knew. But once again, bringing in the imagination and what it does. So the more I realized I was fighting with time to be able to see where I was going, because it's not like I have lights in the in the research in the wildlife management area, and I didn't have a flashlight with me. These are all things I've started to take note on. Okay, bring flashlights, bring a compass, always bring some form of protection because there's hogs out here, stuff like that. So that was, I guess when I say terrifying, they could also heavily involve the imagination. Now, whatever was smacking the walls of that cabin was terrifying to me, even though it may have been nothing at all. It may have been playful if there was something to do with these beings. I can't imagine what else it was. I don't think there was any human beings around, and why would they be doing that? But who knows?
So, and this may, if it does, just let me know. You can start that story before this. But a question that I wanted to ask you, or maybe it's a perfect segue. I don't know. You said a little while ago that you feel like these are more than just a physical being. Did you want to expand upon that, or should we talk about the shower door thing before?
No, yeah, I do want to expand on that. First of all, it was kind of like, are these things real? And when we say real, I like to get philosophical about things. I do contemplate simulation theory and all that kind of stuff. You know, are we as physically real as we think we are? This is something we're going through experientially, but are we really, is it really what it appears to be? So when I say, well, I kind of came to the conclusion that these beings are real, I mean, at the very least, on some level, as real as you and I are. But is there something else about them? So I'm bringing up the Saluda stuff. Once again, just tell me, hey, Phil, time's running out. I had a good friend who I knew from Athens who recontacted me back when I was down in St. Augustine. And we, got together again. And she has a house in Athens, but she has a cabin in Saluda, North Carolina, right by the Green River. So she's like, y'all got to come up to the cabin and just hang out. And I'm like, I'm dying to. So I told you I kind of get gut feelings about things. And I went and looked at the area where her cabin was. I just said, Christina, I'm telling you, I guarantee you've got these things around your cabin. Just looking at it, there's no reason. If they're real, this is the type of area where they would typically be. They're there. And she's not having any of it. She's like, and she entertains a lot of things, but this was just something outside of her interest at that time. And we go up there, and this first visit there didn't tell me any of what we're talking about, but real quick. So I get up in the morning, like I seem to always do, right? I get up before anybody else, and I'm like, I'm going to go out into the wood line. The cabin's in the woods pretty much, but then it gets deeper about another 75 feet where her car parks. It gets deeper, it gets thicker. And I go off into that. I probably went a couple hundred yards away from the cabin into the woods, and I did my tree knock in the morning. And I waited about 30 seconds or maybe a minute, and I didn't hear anything. So I thought, well, I'm just go ahead and walk back to the cabin, maybe start working on breakfast. And right as I start walking back, 3 loud wood knocks, just like the last time, maybe not quite as deep, but very loud. And on the third tree knock, right on the third tree knock, a whole tree came down. This couldn't have been more than 150 feet or 200 feet behind me. I'm walking towards the cabin. It's the other direction, deeper into the woods. I felt the tree hit the ground. I heard that classic kind of cracking sound as it started to come down, and then boom. Now, on the third tree knock, I guess it could be coincidental that a tree happened to fall, but that got my attention. And I didn't know if that was like a sign of like, you shouldn't be here. It certainly didn't seem as friendly as I got. So I went right back to the cabin, but that really got my attention. And of course I had to tell them about that. I'm telling Christina, my friend who owns the cabin, like, you got to believe me, there's something going on out there. And so I had a lot of
and she had never had any experiences out there and never mentioned anything like that. Or of course, if she's not into Bigfoot, she wouldn't probably even know what to listen for or look for.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. So you and me, think about, I don't know when you first got into this subject, but clearly you're open and into all kinds of subjects. How many times prior to this have we been out in the woods with friends, camping or at a cabin or whatever, and heard things that you just go, well, that's nature, right? A big loud wood snap, something that's really loud that would actually take a lot of force, not like a rotten branch falling, but you just like, it's the woods. It's surely we probably have a lot of that. And yeah, it wasn't on her radar on that trip. And now this will all actually kind of segue possibly into the thing on the shower door. So I've been up there a total of 3 times. And every time I go up there, I experience wood knock activity, and I've had rocks thrown at me up there. But generally, I've had what I view mostly, other than that tree being knocked down, and possibly the rock may have even been playful, but I wasn't sure about that. Mostly, I haven't. I talked to the woods up there. This is all around her cabin, and the area that I got the biggest gut feeling about was the area uphill from. She's almost down at the bottom, close to the Green River. So you take all these really steep switchbacks to go off of the outside of Saluda to go off of Highway 26 to go down into the area where she lives, and her cabin's near the bottom, and then it's uphill from there, going back towards that area. And I just had this gut feeling of an area where, once again, they clear cut an area to develop a house in the trees, and there's a dirt road going up there. And I just have always had a feeling about that spot. So, cut to the chase, we went there last year twice. But the first time I think we went up there, when we went the first time was October of not last year, I'm sorry, 2021. So a year and some change. And I had purchased a audio field recorder, a Zoom field recorder. One night I go up that hill. It's probably 9:30 or 10 at night. And I've gotten the rudiments on how to operate this thing, just enough to where I know I can get it. Christina had sewn a nice soft bag for me to put the field recorder in. It wouldn't be like a windsock, but it would be able to carry it in there and also kind of act as a little bit of a windsock. And that way I'd be able to hang it, because she fashioned these two little ties at the top of the bag. So we go up this hill to this spot right close to where the little cleared out area was, where there would have been a house. And I found a tree. This is what I was looking for. I found a tree where there was a long, skinny branch, maybe about 7 feet up, but also a very delicate branch where, like, the weight even of a raccoon, if it tried to get on it, it would break the branch. I don't know if you're familiar with the Zoom audio recorder.
I am. I do. I have one. It's an extremely sensitive recorder.
It is. And they're very lightweight.
Up. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very lightweight. The bag is extra lightweight. So I can easily tie it far enough out on this branch where you can argue that, well, you can maybe hear a raccoon scratching at the tree at the bottom or climbing up. But if it tries to get on that branch, it's going down. And I had brought up food for a couple of reasons. I'm not really into the gifting thing too much, but I was curious. So I brought up food that A, I thought they might be interested in, but B, I'd looked up foods that raccoons and possums will definitely eat. So this involved an apple, a banana, and some Reese's Halloween treats, because this was October. And there was a tree that was bent over. It wasn't completely down, but it was bent, and it was a pretty wide enough to sit these things on. So I rested those on this bent over tree that was probably about 5 inches in diameter. And that was just like, we'll see about that. But once again, as I turned on the recorder so you can hear me making all this noise trying to tie it on the tree, then I start talking to the woods. I'm intentionally not flashing my flashlight into the woods. That seems to me that would be disrespectful. So I'm keeping it kind of just aimed down or right at the area where I need it to. And I'm getting Stacy to do that while I'm doing this. And I start talking, and I said, "Okay, I'm letting you know I'm hanging up an audio recorder. I've taken this food out of the bag. I put it on the tree, and just in case you don't know anything about this, and this captures your sounds." And of course, I'm using English, and a lot of people are going to go, "They don't know English." I'm like, do you know that? So I was letting her know this will capture sounds. It won't capture a visual image of you. And this is when it blew my mind, because I've got this on my phone, because I was running my iPhone at the same time running the recorder. It's on the phone and the recorder, and we heard it in real time. I said it would be great if you left me some sound. Couldn't be 20, 30 feet from us. Like, imagine if you were the person sitting in the dark staring at us while we're doing this, and you got this stick in your lap, and you just went and snapped it twice. It was clearly a snap. It was so obvious. And it was so fast on the heels of my request. I was like, how could anything respond that quickly? You would at least think this was almost simultaneous, me at the end of that request, to these two snaps. So that kind of blew my mind. And then here's where it gets really weird. So we start walking off down the hill, and you can still hear us trunching and stuff. And immediately, and this is the only way I can describe this, I'm not saying, I am putting a story around this because I don't know. But it sounds like there's something. Keep in mind, there's no wind going on, nothing. It suddenly sounds like there's something And this is, of course, the next day when I pull the recorder down. It sounds like there's something scratching the bag with its fingernail. And it gets to the point where it's even registering on the meter. And we're not even we're not even 75 feet away. And the minute I turned around to say, remember some sounds, it stopped abruptly. That scratching sound stopped. It almost reminded me like a kid getting caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. So without getting too boring about all these recordings, I've got hours of these recordings of tree knocks, this thing being scratched or sometimes thumped, where you can tell something has actually hit it and the meters spike. I have yet to. I went back last night and started listening to all this again because I hadn't listened to it since like last year. I was like, I got to get this stuff into a recorder because you have a lot of downtime where it's just crickets and the stream that's right there. Like when you hear, like when I've listened to Christopher Noel's recordings, it's like bang, 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 bang. But then later I realized he's edited all this out of all the dead time. But suddenly it'll pick up for a moment. And so I've got hours of that. And the thing is, no, I couldn't see into the dark, but it just seemed to me like these things were right around us and I couldn't even tell. And how is whatever is scratching that bag? It can't be a raccoon because, like I said, I made sure even an average sized raccoon would snap that branch. Where is it scratching it from? Because I'm not hearing any sound on the leaf litter. And I did get one yelp, one very loud yelp in the distance on all of those. That's so far. I've never gone through this. This is 20 hours of recording that I haven't poured all through. So that made me think, well, was there their ability to be right there with us and we don't even know it? Like that's what kind of got me thinking that to begin with. All those trips have always been very fruitful. In terms of like one time walking in the daytime in the woods there on that same excursion when I brought the recorder, I'm just walking in the woods with my phone. When I listen back, there's a double knock, pop, pop. And then about 15 seconds later, another double knock coming from a different area in a different tone. And you're like, is that one alerting another one to my presence and the other one acknowledging? I know that's reading story into it, but.
What did Stacy say about the stick cracks that occurred right when you asked that question?
I looked at her, I said, you heard that, didn't you? She said, yeah. But, once again, she's so stoic, like, oh, it's interesting. I'm like, it's interesting. That was not like, I get so excited about stuff. I'm like Mulder, like I want to believe. And I see that about myself. I see that I have to make myself kind of take the opposite opinion sometimes and kind of balance myself out.
Well, does she believe in them?
I don't know. I think she does. I don't press her on it, but I think she does. It's just not her area of interest. And that's going to come to the point with the shower door. And I'm just going to go ahead and segue into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know a lot of people say that once you start trying to seek these things out, that they're going to seek you out. I don't know if that's true or not. That also sounds very paranormal. And once again, I'm very open to that. So the area where I live here in Savannah is actually a small its own historic town called Vernonburg. And it's like 300 people and 3 roads and a river. And it's got a pretty good wooded area across the street from me. And even my backyard is moderately wooded, but it's more like farmy kind of wooded. But after some of these things I started doing up there and in Blue Sky, 10 miles west of Savannah, I'm finding these over the last few years, these glyphs in my backyard. I didn't do them. And once again, maybe happenstance could make 3 branches. If you look at that one that looks, and somebody pointed out, it looks like a Celtic cross. It's not 2 sticks that come together to look like that. If you look at the top left quadrant that forms that upper frame of the Celtic cross, that's one teeny stick that had to fall right in place to form that framework of that upper window or whatever you want to call it. I just sent you a fragment of some of those things. The one that's near the front porch on the concrete. You know what that was? Did you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so Elliot had this thing back at that point where he just gathered up sticks, and he'd have a stick in between each finger. He just loved carrying sticks. It was time to get him in for lunch. And I said, Elliot, you can't go in with the sticks. They're going to drop bits of bark on the floor. You can't do that because he didn't want to not take them inside. But I made him understand, we got to go in. So he dropped them in a chaotic pile, of course, onto the concrete right there. We went inside and I gave him lunch, and then it was time to do other things. And then one thing led to another. We never went back outside. Got to dinner time. Well, the next day I opened the front door to go check on the cat, and that's how those sticks were arranged. Now, once again, I can't answer that. I don't know what that was. Somebody, once again, because I've shared these before, sometimes on social media, somebody said that looks like a butterfly or a dragonfly, not a butterfly, a dragonfly. They all kind of have a runic quality to me. Not being some expert on runes, but just based on the things I've seen with runes, they have that kind of look to them. So getting back to the whole point is maybe they try to reach out and contact you. So we had been on this trip up to the mountains where I brought the field recorder, and then we come back home. And I checked the date on that photograph I sent you. So this occurred on November 13th of 2021. So we'd been back for a short while from the mountains. I got up to relieve myself. And in our bedroom has a bathroom that's attached to it. But also there's a hallway off the door close to my side of the bed, and there's a hallway bathroom. Well, if I have to get up to go to the bathroom, because it's right, I just get off the bed, 3 or 4 feet to the door and into that bathroom. I don't run the risk of tripping on things, getting around the bed, getting into the bathroom that's off of our bedroom. And that may or may not have anything to do with this, but I thought it's a little point I bring up. So I turned on like the light in there, and all of a sudden the power goes out, and I only know that because the air conditioning wasn't on, or the heating wasn't on at the time anyway, but that one light was on and it went off. And it came back on and went off again. Now, out here in Vernonburg, if nature sneezes, the lights go out here. There's so many old oak trees and things that drop branches. And usually after the lights go on and off a couple of times, you're going to be waiting for the bucket trucks to come out, anywhere from 2 to whatever hours. These lights went on and off and on 5 times. And it was kind of just like, wow, I don't recall that ever happening that many times. But, what do you do with that? You can't do anything with it. So I was tired. I went back to bed. The next day I get up and I go to take a shower. And like to tell the people, it's like, this is one of those showers with a glass door that you open up with a handle and get in. It's not a curtain thing. So it's a big rectangular box with a glass door on it. So I'm in there and, I'm taking a nice warm bath. And, it gets steamy. I don't even think I'd turn the fan on to kind of absorb the steam. So I started seeing something in a little bit from the inside on the glass. But it's like, that is weird looking, but I can't quite make it out. And to give you some reference too, like sometimes when he was younger, I'd be taking a shower and Elliot would come running in there telling me about something. And he'd want me to, because I'd draw like a goofy face or a Martian or something with my finger through the steam. And he'd love that. And I'll get back to that. There's a point behind that. So I still can't quite make it out. So once I get out of the shower and look from the outside in, I am like, what the hell is that? I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Like, I know you had gotten your impression, and since you've already had an impression, I didn't want to tell you what I see. And this is clearly, who knows? What it looked like to me is kind of a classic gray alien head, but with like one of those 19 World War I gas masks on, with like the tube and all. Like the freakiest looking thing I'd ever seen. It was so well done. So I'm freaking out. I know I didn't do it. But I know Elliot didn't do it because it's well above his articulation level, even now at the age of 7, much less so a year and some change ago. He just couldn't do that. He's still doing, very angular stick figures and stuff. And he draws all the time. Here's the reason I had to ask Stacy she says, no, I didn't do that. The 2 reasons I know why she didn't do it is A, her word is as good as gold. B, we are total opposites when it comes to this kind of stuff. I have a dark sense of humor. I'm into everything paranormal. I write dark music. And to this day, like I'll tell a dark joke or make some kind of dark, and she'll take me serious. I'm like, Stacy, how long have you known me? I'm just kidding, but it's just my dark humor, She would never in her life even draw something dark. And to me, it looks dark. Okay. Maybe I shouldn't be reading that into it. It took me aback, and I didn't know if it tied into the light thing earlier, where I had this light show going on in the other bathroom. And remember, this thing has been etched from the inside, not the outside, from the inside of the shower. But it was more easily seen from the outside. So the other interesting detail about this is I decided not to clean the shower door. And every time I took a shower, it reappeared. The steam would form around it, but it wouldn't cover those areas. Now, when I would do those little goofy faces for Elliot, the next day, those were gone. They didn't reappear. The steam went totally over my little artwork thing where the fingers were. I would use my index finger to do the work. Whatever did this, eventually I got a hunch. I looked at it closer, and it seemed like it's possible that whatever did this was very oily. Like I see like little beads in there. If you look up really close, you can see like at the top of the
especially
head,
at the top. Little... Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's real broken looking, like a smear.
Yeah. And so I figured, like, well, I tend to be kind of oily skinned anyway, but I go in the shower and I grab the bar soap. It's the first thing I do, and it's in my hands. So Elliot comes in later, and I make up the little picture, and my hands are nice and dry, and so that thing is not leaving any kind of oil residue, and the next day it's gone. Well, so I did a test. I went into the shower. I made sure I didn't wash first, and I just drug my fingers laterally across the top of the door. That stayed for about a week and a half to 2 weeks. It got fainter and fainter, and then it was gone. This stayed for the better part of 2 months before it started to fade out. So I have no clue what that was. All I know is I didn't do it. My wife didn't do it, and Elliot didn't do it. And the night before the shower was that weird little 5-time lights on and off thing, which may or may not even be connected. Like, what do you do with that, right?
Yeah, like if I hold my hand up, and if you're facing the picture, if you're facing the face, right, the right side of it, if you take your hand and you cut off the left side, it looks like a face to me. Well, that's what it looks like to me, is an eye. I can see an ear, maybe a little bit of a mouth.
That's the more clearly visible side.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I cut off the face, the quote unquote face side, then I see what you said, like more of an industrial, like a helmet or something very utilitarian. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that.
I have no clue either, and I guess I won't know. And nothing like that has happened since. That's been, obviously more than a year now.
So no more lights flickering or noises or anything like that going on in the house.
There's been none of that. And actually, the other than a couple of exceptions, the glyphs have stopped in the backyard. I haven't noticed anything. Here's the other thing. People go on about what they call, I think there's something to it, and sometimes it's our imagination too. It's the whole, what do they call them? Tree stick. It's when you see a stick stuck in the ground or a branch. And some of those are definitely interesting, especially when it's a really fragile stick that to use any force to jam it in the ground would seem to break it. Or if it's coming in at an angle, I find these things, but a lot of times it can be simply a branch falling from very high and sticking into the ground. Ground sticks, that's what they call them. I'm like, well, yeah, it's obvious it's in the ground as a stick. I guess that's the right name, a ground stick. But, so I kind of take a lot of those things. Like, that's interesting, but it's not quite worth my time to really, because, branches do fall. They can stick in the ground. But I haven't really found anything that in the yard recently. Now, I did go back, interesting, because I was inspired by this interview today, because I knew, like, you're so open-minded. Like, I was so looking forward to this interview because I like your open-mindedness. And it's not like you're really open to all aspects, but from negative to positive and to very paranormal and or ethereal to the more down-to-earth, rootsy kind of thing about it, which is great because there's just so much more room for conjecture and discussion instead of having to totally nail it down. And so in that inspiration, I went back out to Blue Sky with Elliot yesterday. I did this for the second time. I haven't gone back, but we did take, because I've heard so many people with the thing with the jars of peanut butter. So I went to the grocery store, I bought a jar of peanut butter, and I bought a bag of potato chips. Now, have you ever heard about Sasquatch being attracted to the color blue?
Actually, yeah, I think that I have heard that.
I have too. I don't know what it's about, but a lot of times it involves like blue Mylar balloons or a collection of beer cans that have blue on them. Or, I don't know, or blue. They like little blue toys and trinkets and things like that. So we brought a little blue toy, And yes, people, I will go try to find the bag of potato chips and retrieve it, and the peanut butter if I can. But I wanted to see, because I've known other people that have put them out there, and something has been able to unscrew the lid, which we know a raccoon, as smart as they are, they're not going to be able to unscrew an unopened jar of peanut butter. So we put this about 100 feet in the woodline behind a glyph structure that I know is probably legitimate, because about 11 or 12 feet, there's a lot of tree bends that go into the tree structure, saplings that are bent. And I know, because I know this place so well, before I found this structure, those trees were not bent, but they are bent over into the structure, which then is a bunch of branches placed sort of teepee style. But one of the saplings that's not bent over, that's still part of the cluster of the same saplings, about 12 feet up, a nice branch that's not rotten, has been snapped. And it's pulled down to where the bark started peeling. You see what I mean? If a person did that, they would have to bring a ladder in there with them to even do it. These trees are not scalable. They're pine trees without, even if they had lower branches, most of these pine trees have very weak branches on them. And there are no low branches anyway to scale. So you would have to bring a ladder up to do it, go all the way down this into the woods with a ladder. And the other point is, I found another tree break yesterday that was new, something I recognized as being new. It's about a 2.5-inch diameter sapling, a gum tree. I couldn't break it with all my might. Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't in his prime. And it's broken off about 11 feet up, but it's still attached. You see what I mean? It kind of forms that little triangle.
Right.
It's hanging down on the ground. Well, if the wind did that in any kind of recent storms, which I can't remember us having, because this is a very fresh break, right next to it is a wimpy little pine tree sapling that's literally about an inch in diameter and already rotting. Like, this thing has never gotten off the ground. It's 15 feet high. It's skinny. It's rotten. I could push it over with my index finger. Why didn't that go? That's like 1 foot from this other sapling. And those are the kind of things it's interesting to look at. Like, okay, if you see a bunch of branches down, maybe, yeah, some strong wind swooped down in one area and took these things down. That tree should be gone if that other thing was broken. So I found a lot of stuff in there like that. Anyway, I, of course, will update you whenever my wife has Monday and Tuesday off. So I said, one of these days now, the three of us are going to go back out there and see what's up with the peanut butter.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me know what goes down with that. Please keep in touch. Oh, before we go, are the pictures that you shared with me, are those for public consumption, or is that just for me?
Absolutely. You do whatever you want with them. I'm
Thank
an
you.
open book. I'm not, you can share them wherever you want. I just, I make no claims about them for the most part. I have my mind set around some of them, that Mulder part of me that's, yeah, there's something to that Celtic cross, but I make no absolute claims about any of it.
Well, it's interesting at the very least, right? And as you said, people can make up their own minds as far as what they think about them. That's okay. Yeah. So if you guys go to intothefrayradio.com, I will put some pictures in the show notes for this episode. Well, Philip, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Shannon. It's been an honor, and I really appreciate you giving me the chance to jump on and speak.